Hello, how are you? It's Matt Heisler from Vanderbilt Properties. And today on Inside Real Estate, we're going to talk about a new Massachusetts law that affects real estate agents and rental consumers, people who are looking to rent, either to rent out a property or looking to rent a property for themselves. So uh, basically, the law is very recent. It hasn't even been signed into law, but it could go into effect as soon as August 1st. And I think we all expect that it's going to. So we're really going to tackle this from two angles today. The first angle is whether or not this is a good law. And the second part is it really going to do what everyone says it's going to do? And the second one to me is a lot more interesting, just because politically, the pressure to have it do a certain thing is very high. And so when they pass a law like this, they say, don't worry, we've fixed it. And then when I look at it from an economic point of view, I realize they haven't fixed anything at all. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about and why. So to start us off, we're going to get started here by talking about what is the law. So in Massachusetts, and I can say this as a former renter of Boston properties, there is a lot of interesting stuff that can go on in the rental market in Boston. Boston has a huge rental market on a per capita basis relative to a lot of other cities, and a lot of that is student driven. We just have so many students. None of them are really, a very small percentage of them are going to buy permanent residences for the 4 or 5 years that they're here to study, and most of them rent. So September 1st is the big changeover day. There's just a lot of turnover, a lot of activity, and real estate agents can make a pretty good living once they've established themselves just doing rentals in Boston. So, when we talk about pretty good living, it turns out that there were a bunch of different ways that they could charge people. So, some of them are pretty obvious. You can charge a tenant for helping them find a place. You can charge a landlord for advertising a place for rent. But one of the things that you could also do is you could make the tenant pay your fee if you were working with the landlord. And in what is very similar to the real estate settlement case that came down last year, Massachusetts has taken a look at that and they've said, if your alliance from the deal is to the landlord, then you shouldn't be charging the tenant money. And I think that makes a lot of sense because if the tenant is paying the agent, then shouldn't the tenant have some rights about agency and confidentiality and all these other things that as real estate agents we try to take very seriously? Usually the money follows the agency, but not in Boston rentals when the market gets tight. If they can get the tenant to pay them this fee, then they do. And sometimes they take money from the landlord and they charge a tenant fee on top of that. So the new law seeks to clarify this, and ultimately, I think this is a good thing to do. Again, I'm a big fan of the money should follow the agency, the money should follow the relationship. And so now landlords, if they want to have an agent represent their property, they have to pay them directly. Okay? So, and the tenants cannot pay listing agents of rental property. Okay, can't do it. Okay, it makes it illegal. It's not supposed to happen. So, I'm not really sure what the enforcement mechanism is. I'm sure there will be one. I'm sure the MLSs will try to figure that out. However, it may take a little while before we know for sure whether or not this is being followed. One would think that the brokerages would be highly incentivized not to get caught with their hand in the cookie jar here. But, again, with every kind of law, you need a certain amount of enforcement. You got to let people figure out how else they're going to do it and stuff like that. Eventually, the market will find balance. That's what economics teaches us, and we will talk about that in a little bit. So now, on the tenant side, this seems like a pretty good deal. Now you can hire someone to help you find a place. You can pay a particular fee, and it should all be great. It should be a piece of cake, right? So the theory here is because some of the listing agents were double dipping and charging tenants relatively large amounts of money and then charging the landlords as well, that the idea here is that the overall commission paid out to real estate agents will go down. Okay. And they have some numbers about it. And for sure, there is a lot of commission being swapped hands between the real estate agents on a relative basis to other parts of the country because of the way that they were doing this. But here's the other thing. The main reason that they did it was they said this will make things cheaper for renters in a market where affordability is an issue. So now we're going to dive into the economics of that particular statement. As soon as the law was passed by the legislature, Zillow has a government relations and public affairs group, and they have someone that studies new laws in the Northeast that affect real estate. Her name is Lorraine Collins. I'm going to call her out a little bit here, but she's just one of many. Anyone on Maura Healey's staff or, you know, in Boston, they're going to say the same stuff. And so, her quote here is that broker fee reform is an immediate and necessary step to reduce financial barriers and provide meaningful relief to renters, right? Like this is the goal. This is going to help renters. Okay. So this reform, she goes on to say, will decrease upfront costs for renters, making it easier and more affordable for people to access new housing opportunities, increase renter mobility, and that may unlock more homes on the market and give renters greater leverage in lease negotiations. I mean, there's more there. Okay. I mean, if you just read that like this is a home run, but of course, that's not how it's going to work at all. Okay. The prices that are paid in Boston for rental property have to do with the supply of rental property and the demand from the tenants. That's what this has to do with. Okay. Now, if the fees are really high, it's not that the tenants don't know that going in. They know how high the fees are. Okay, it is laid out to them. They understand that they're going to have to pay these enormous fees. So what do? They look for properties that cost less. And if there's not enough of those properties uh, out there that everyone can afford, or if all the landlords are charging too much money, then the prices have to come in, right? The prices have to come in because of all the extra fees baked into it. There's a certain amount of disposable income that tenants can pay to rent property. That's all there is. Okay. Now, the question here is with the new law, does that change? And economics teaches us that no, it does not change. Basically, the amount of disposable income that the tenants will have after this law goes into effect is exactly the same as the amount of disposable income that they had the day before the law goes into effect. It's exactly the same. Now, they're going to pay less fees, but if they really want a place, guess what they're going to do? They're going to bid for it. They're going to pay more. So rents are actually going to go up, which benefits the landlord. And I'm not really sure that's what they intended at all in this particular structure. And I think that it's a little disingenuous to just sort of assume that this law, which is going to reduce broker fees, it's 100% going to do that, that everyone gets on board with the new law. Brokerage fees will come in, but it's not going to get any easier for anybody to rent. Okay, that's a myth. Okay, they will just bid more for the properties because ultimately their transactions costs are lower. They will have more disposable income and rents actually will go up. So, this, again, just to go back to her quote, the reform will decrease upfront costs for renters. That is true, right? So that is good. Making it easier and more affordable for people to access new housing opportunities. That is false. So the supply and demand hasn't changed. So it won't be any easier. And I just told you it's not going to be any more affordable. I mean, I wish it was. I wish it was as simple as, doing that. But it isn't. It isn't. That's not what economics teaches us. The market value of these properties includes the transaction costs. So if you lower the transaction costs, then the rent costs go up. I don't mean to beat a dead horse about it, but this is what happens. So will it increase renter mobility? It probably will because the transaction cost of switching units goes down, but it's not going to move it a lot. Okay? Moving's expensive and a huge pain in the neck, and people only do it when they have to, right? So even if you're students, you're not going to be switching every year just because you can save, I don't know, 35%, 40% on your transaction fees for switching. You're just not going to do it. You're not going to move that much anyway. So I don't think there's going to be a ton of increased mobility, but there should be some. Economics does teach us that there should be some. So which will help unlock more homes on the market. Well, it doesn't do that at all. People moving from one part of Boston to another part of Boston, that's net zero. That doesn't change the number of houses that are on the market. This is just completely false. There's nothing about this law that will increase the supply of homes on the market. Nothing. and give renters greater leverage in lease negotiations. I don't see how it does that at all. It looks to me like a total falsehood. It's not true. Anyone who thinks that that's what's going to happen, you know, your leverage as a renter is entirely dependent on how many other people want to rent the space. Okay. If there's five people behind you and they're all willing to rent, you got zipped for leverage. That's just how it goes. Right. So, again, a lot's going to be said about this new law and about how it's great for tenants. It's not really. It's not really great for tenants. I still think it's a good law, right? Because I think fees should follow the agency and the relationship. Okay, so I mean I'm okay with that. The things that were allowed were, you know, a little slimy. So I think they've cleaned some of that up, and that's good. But listen, this is not a magic bullet. It's not going to save anybody any real money, and that's just how it goes. So that's it for this edition of Inside Real Estate, and I hope people check in with the other things that are true and not true about the real estate world that I post here on my video channel from time to time. See you next time.